This episode discusses potentially sensitive and triggering topics. Viewer discretion is advised, and as always, your mental health is a priority, and please consider either skipping the episode or reaching out to local resources. Remember,
3, 2, 1, 0.
Good afternoon, Bob. Great to have you on the podcast today. I'll call it a sunny Washington, D.C. I think we're about 20 degrees warmer than we have been over the last week, so it's a little bit nicer, I would say. But honestly, like I said, it's great to have you on. This is going to be the restart of the podcast for the new year, so you get to be guest number one, and I really can't thank you enough for coming on. I know you got an amazing story, amazing mental health journey. Just sounds like an amazing life journey too. So, we all love to hear it, and we're looking forward to it. So, if you want to start, no problem at all. If you want to start, just maybe with an introduction, about yourself. So. Sounds like an interesting career, interesting life there. As a veteran myself, let me say thanks. Thanks for your service. I know we're somewhat rival services, Navy versus Air Force here, but we definitely all share. I know between me and you, we've talked a lot before this, and we obviously share a lot in common. And it's just funny when you talk to other veterans and things like that. It's easy to talk to each other sometimes, and then obviously, like everything kind of connects. It's just this weird behind the scenes connection. I feel like that happens sometimes, and we can't thank you enough for your service and what you've done between your service and your work for the government and everything else. And like I said, we're looking forward to hearing what would you have to say.
Yeah, definitely my honor to serve, and happy to have done it and learned a lot from it and gave a lot to it.
Definitely. Yeah. So, what part? I know you've kind of had a different mental health journey, like you just kind of hinted at your kind of your first iteration with it was maybe at 12 years old. But where's a good maybe for something I'm always been interested in as an adult? When did you kind of first start to realize like, hey, maybe I need to seek some assistance or something else is going on here?
Well, I entered the Air Force in 1975 when I went to the Air Force Academy and graduated in 79. Small claim to fame, we were the last all-male class.
Oh, wow.
Women were admitted in the class of 80 for the first time. And back in those days, mental health support from the military was kind of non-existent to, sporadic.
Right.
So I chose to keep my depression a secret. And in retrospect, I did what I did. At the time, it made sense. If I had to do it over again, I don't think I would. I think I would disclose and seek whatever help could be provided. Because for, the time at the Service Academy and the 20 years in active duty, I was high functioning, which was really a blessing, and I was able to hold a job. And but there were days, and I had mental health days, and just said, "Hey, I'm not feeling well today. I'm calling sick." I had pretty supportive bosses along the way, which I did appreciate. Try not to take advantage of that because, you just try to muster through and do the best you can.
Right.
But the bottom line is, back then, if I had disclosed, I probably would have been medically discharged and thrown to the curb. Nowadays, military is a lot better with their treatment, as are treatment opportunities within the private sector and the public sector as well. So, the biggest thing that I got caught up in is I started to self-medicate instead of
Okay.
ask for real professional help. And the self-medication, I joke, and I'm allergic to alcohol in that I don't have the second enzyme to break the ketone down into a carbohydrate to
Oh,
eliminate.
interesting.
I'm morally opposed to illegal drugs of any kind.
Right.
And I work too damn hard for my money to piss it away gambling.
Right.
So that left sexual promiscuity as
Okay.
my coping skill, or my self-medication strategy. And, when you live in severe depression, you are really just kind of focused on trying to ease the emotional pain.
Right. Definitely.
And the emotional pain could build and kind of hit you at any time. Mine was doubled and tripled, by just the stress of the service academy. And then it get to the point where it's like, well, I need to self-medicate. So I, go out and hook up with somebody, and for a brief while, the things were pleasurable and the dopamine hits, and my stress and emotional pain subsided a bit, but then the shame and the guilt of what I had just done kicks in. And the shame and the guilt for me was extremely strong. And I would beat myself up for making, poor choices and doing what I did. And that would add to the emotional pain that was already starting to build from just the day-to-day stress of living and operating at a service academy. And so I'd have to go and find somebody else and ease the emotional stress. And that vicious cycle played over and over and over and over again for 33 years of my life.
Wow, it's a long time.
And, through marriages, and the thing that kind of caught up to me was my then therapist, because once I retired from the Air Force, my wife said, "Hey, you've got to go get a psychiatrist and get on medication, and you've got to get a therapist to help you." The therapist, when she found out that I had been self-medicating with sexual promiscuity, she ended our session early, and she gave me the name of a discreet lab to go to have blood work and urine work done to check for every known STD to mankind,
Right.
and known to mankind at that time. And
Now,
not
just
only
out of
that, but
curiosity,
I had to go
what year
home
was
and I
this?
had to tell my wife what I had done and have her go get checked. That was the hardest day of my life. And, to shatter her love and her support and her universe in one fell swoop made me feel about yay big.
Right. Right. So
And
she
I
didn't
wanted
know
to
before
just,
this, right?
I'm
She
sorry?
she really didn't know at all before this, right?
No, she did not.
Gotcha.
And the birth of two kids, and she covered for me a lot with, my mental health challenges. And, I come home from work and I'd be totally mentally exhausted. And it's like, can you take the kids? They've been kind of ornery today. And that
Right.
was the last thing in the world I needed was two ornery kids. But, you muddle through and you do the best you can. The But what I really want to say to all of this is for people who are thinking, hey, I've been struggling with what I think is depression or anxiety or bipolar or what, doesn't matter what the mental illness is. If you think you need professional help, get it.
Right.
Don't live in darkness and don't try to self-medicate your way out of the issue, because it's only going to just snowball on you and make things worse for you, regardless of what your self-medication strategy is. Strategy, that's too strong a word for it. It's just, kind of you're grasping for straws at that point.
Right. Something that'll take the edge off, or something that'll
you
help.
need to be ready to be in therapy.
Right.
My wife made me go. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to start talking about myself and about what I was feeling and everything else. In fact, I remember going into one of my therapy appointments, 10 years into therapy, and when I got a new therapist, and I'll explain why in a moment. And I said, well, don't talk to me about any of that, feeling stuff, because I don't have any feelings. I'm an analytical person, and I think. And she told me years later that it was all she could do not to laugh in my face at that remark. So, you don't know what you don't know. And, but for the first 12 years of my therapy, and I've been in therapy now for 27 years. So for the first 12 years, I just was showing up.
Right.
I wasn't putting in the work.
Okay.
I didn't want to get better. The one therapist that I had, I saw her on a weekly basis. Her office was across the street from Burger King. So I would go to pig out and fast food, before, during, or not during, but before or after, or both. And that's the only reason that I kind of kept going to those meetings. And she would write down every word I said. And I said, what are you doing, writing a book? And she said, well, it's important to document what you're doing. And she never asked me questions. It just was a bad fit.
Right.
So while I'm talking about bad fits, let me just say that, you have to have the right rapport with a therapist and a psychiatrist. If they're not serving you and you are the customer, then you need to find somebody else. And, easier said than done, because one of the biggest laments that I hear from friends and other people who are struggling with mental illness challenges are, I can't find anybody who accepts my insurance, or I can't find anybody, period.
Right.
And so they finally get somebody, and they feel like, oh, I finally have a therapist. And they just assume that that's the one for them for the rest, of the, time that they're in therapy. If it's not a fit, it's not a fit.
No.
And call it out and be honest. The therapist won't get upset. You could say, hey, this is just not a good fit. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel like I have the right rapport with you to be able to open up and talk about my most intimate feelings. So switch.
I agree. And I've been in similar situations. And it's funny that you mentioned the whole insurance thing, and it's almost like I want to call it a circus here in the US of how things work. But there is a thing to, you go the distance, you get all the way there, and you have a psychologist, and then they don't work out. And then, like you said, having to restart that whole process again, which could be a while, and you already need care, and you're already potentially like maybe not open to it, but you're going, right. It's just like the whole process just doesn't help itself if you're trying to do that. And I think, for people, whatever you're dealing with, depression, anxiety, anything, it just kind of makes it worse. I've been lucky enough, the few bad fits I've had, I was easy enough to get other, I was still in the military, so it was kind of easy enough to get other appointments. A recent one kind of worked out in a similar fashion, just because there was a lot of other providers at the same office that took my insurance. So, but yeah, it can be an interesting problem, and just feeds right back to the stigma and the ability to get assistance, So.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you're really demonstrating, Josh, is that you're not alone.
Right. Exactly. So
And that to me, when I first realized that I wasn't the only one in the world who was suffering, that other people were having mental health challenges and struggling with those mightily, um, there this sense of community develops, and that is so powerful. And to realize that, hey, if others are dealing with this and they're making progress, I can do that too.
right.
And it wasn't until, again, until I was really ready. 12 years into therapy, I was 2 years into my second therapist, and she came into the office one day looking kind of haggard. And I was had the appointment at 8 in the morning that day, and she just got up out of her seat, came over, stuck her face into my face, and said, "When the hell are you going to start working on your own self?
Wow.
I'm sitting here busting my butt, coming in for you and showing up and doing all I can to help you, and you're not doing a damn thing." And
Wow.
I said, "That stops now. And if it doesn't stop, then you find somebody else to help you, because I'm not going to waste my time any longer with you." And it
Wow.
was like, oh my God. Well, P.S., what I realized is she had had a miscarriage, and she was having a procedure in the ER, and got released from the ER at 5 a.m. And 3 hours later is sitting in front of me in a therapy chair
Wow.
because she cared that much about me. And
That's crazy.
that made such a lasting impact on me, that somebody cares that much to help me, then why don't I help myself?
Right. Right.
So that was the thing that sprung me and got me to the point of saying, hey, let me really start working on this. And the operative word there is work.
Right.
I had homework exercises. I had, all sorts of different things. I'm writing letters to dead parents, on and on and on. There's no shortage of things that a therapist can do and tools at their disposal to help. I finally took advantage of all of that. Now, that doesn't mean things got really, peachy keen, right overnight.
Right.
I'm still working on a whole lot of things, but I have come to the point where I have had enough modalities of therapy that I really understand myself. I have kept myself with the coping skills that I have learned in the last year alone, have kept myself out of the ER and admission to inpatient
That's good.
3 separate times, which is just huge.
Right. It is. Yeah.
Because prior to that, my first therapist, well, you have to sign the form here that you contract for safety.
Right.
And I'm like, contract for safety? What the hell? What are you going to do? Punish me if I kill myself between now and next week?
Right.
And so one time I said, no, I'm not going to sign. This is really stupid and amateurish, and I'm not playing. Picks up the phone, calls 911. The next thing I know, I'm on the back of a bus, and I'm being, driven to the local ER, and then got admitted for the very first time way back when. Um, and and I went, whoa, she's not messing around. So I promised you I would tell you the story of why I had a second therapist. I I I had a suicide attempt in
Okay.
2008, shortly after I had to confess to my wife, and I just felt so horrible, and I no longer wanted to live, and not live, but I wanted to actively kill myself. So I drove my car into a tree at 40 miles an hour, and totaled the car, and pretty much totaled me. I was out of consciousness, or in and out of consciousness, and I got medevac to Shock Trauma Hospital in Baltimore.
Oh wow.
And they patched me up physically for 2 weeks, and then and then cordially invited me to stay in their behavioral health unit, i.e. their psych ward, for 2 more weeks to patch up my brain, as if that was possible. Well, while I'm there in the hospital, a phone call comes in for me at the nurse's station, which was highly unusual because the patients had a separate phone that we answered ourselves and gave to each other. And it was my therapist. And when I first heard her voice, I was like, "Oh, this is so lovely. You're calling to check up on me. That really shows something. I'm impressed."
Right.
"No, I'm calling you because you didn't contract for safety. I'm firing you as a patient." And I went, "You can't do that. That's illegal." "No, it's
Interesting.
legal." "Well, it's immoral." "No,
Right.
it's moral." It's not ethical." "It's ethical." And the bottom line was, there I was. And the only way you get out of inpatient is you have to have your next appointments already scheduled with a psychiatrist and a therapist. And since my psychiatrist was part of the practice of my therapist was in, I'm now short a psychiatrist too because
Right.
they both fired me.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, wow, man, I'm a million miles away from getting out of here. And fortunately, I had a nurse, ask me where I lived and look for different, providers in my area. And at the time, the provider that I got set up with as a therapist accepted my insurance.
Okay.
But the insurance industry is such a screwy thing. You do a whole podcast on that.
I know, right?
And that it became just one of these, well, I'm not going to bother with insurance anymore, and became private pay. And I'm fortunate that I have the means that I'm able to do that. But how many hundreds of thousands of people don't have the means and the ability to go private pay for psychiatric and therapeutic care?
I agree. Yeah.
That's a real travesty.
Yeah.
And it's, I think mental health, I mean, we all lived through COVID a few years back, but I think mental illness is as much or more of a pandemic. And there really should be a mental health czar in the White House, in my opinion, and being able to coordinate all the different care at the private sector, public health service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, we're not
Yeah.
going to fix that here in this podcast.
Right. That would make sense, though. It's an interesting idea. Definitely. It's funny you mentioned the pay out of pocket for your own care. When I first started seeing somebody regularly, I think I was an E6 at the time. You as an E6 back in early 2000s, pay wasn't bad, right? Depending on how well you budgeted. But back then, the stigma of, security clearances and this and that and trying to get mental health care was alive and well. I mean, it's alive and well today. It's definitely a bit better, though. So I kind of did a similar thing where I was doing weekly appointments, at $125 a pop. That eventually started to catch up to me financially. I said, well, I can't sustain this. At some point, this is, just too much. And at the time, I ended up I was actually on an exchange program with the Canadian military, and I actually reached out. They had a really good, or I had actually went to Afghanistan with the Canadian military, and they had a really good intake and kind of outtake thing. When you went to a deployment and came back, you had to see mental health. And on the way back, I actually, went through their little intake from coming back from the deployment and realized, okay, maybe I can get help through their mental health thing, and that's kind of what I did. So I ended up working out in that aspect, but yeah, it was still kind of, the whole paying out of pocket and trying to sustain that for me back then. I realized quickly was not doable, and how, like you said, how many people now. I know people even now can't afford copays, let alone paying for a whole appointment. So
Yeah.
it's just interesting. It's kind of definitely a problem we want to tackle somehow. So
Yeah, it's a real issue. And, for people in the audience who may not be military, your stressors are just as real as the stressors of people in the military. Maybe they're a different flavor or whatever, but stressors are stressors. And, you should need to be mindful of those and be able to try to address them to the best of your ability. Um, I recently did a presentation on psychedelics for Shepherd Pratt Hospital,
Okay.
and I was one of three panelists. The first panelist was a the expert in the world on psilocybin and psychedelics and help for psychiatric care. Um, and he talked about, the history and the state of the art and the state of the science and where we are in the research in environs. And then I came in and I talked about my lived experience. And, I have been through so many different therapeutic modalities, and I
Mhm.
could throw acronym city at you, which isn't going to help anybody from here to there. But the bottom line is, and I did ketamine, which is considered a psychotic drug, and I did not have benefit from it.
Interesting.
So I tried a lot of things. And, what I want to say about that is don't be afraid to try something new. Maybe you've read about something, and hopefully you are reading about things and trying to get as smart as you can about your mental illness and the treatments that are available. New medications coming out almost on a daily basis anymore. The ketamine nasal spray is now FDA approved, and insurance can cover it in certain instances. Um, but what works for me, or what has worked, is the two psych meds that I'm on and the skills that I've learned in a dialectical behavior therapy course that took me a year to complete. And, you learn skills about emotional regulation, and you learn skills about, what do you do when you are emotionally dysregulated, and how do you calm yourself down to the point where rational thought can take over. So a lot of real, science-based stuff.
Right.
And I'm a science geek by education and
Same here.
training, so that kind of resonated with me. But it's you just need to kind of know what's out there and be your best advocate.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I follow a lot of people online, good and bad, right? And a lot of people seem to push one thing or the other. And then what happens, I feel like, is you get people that maybe blindly follow different directions based off what they learn or what they see. And for my own experience, I went through a gambit of different drugs and finally landed on one that worked. Um, it was kind of exhausting, Yeah, you affect it. You get this different side effects every time, and it's like another cycle. A few times I did want to quit. I mean, I didn't even want to start the drug thing in the first place. To me, that was always like a no go. Like, I don't need it. I don't need to do this. But I had a great psychologist and psychiatrist that were, you know, I don't want to say they held my hand, but they really explained it to me. They said, "Hey, you're in a good spot. This might be a time to try it, right?" And they, I'm so glad that they went through that with me, and I landed on something. But you see it online a lot where you see people say no mental health drugs. You need to wean off your drugs. You can do it with this. You can do it with that. You can do it with exercise. That's all you need. Things like that, and that kind of what you were hinting at. I would say for the audience out there, we're all individuals. We're all different. We share a lot of the same issues. We can talk about them together. But the care that we get is going to be and needs to be tailored to
Yeah.
our own thing. And drugs for somebody might not work for you. A certain type of therapy might not work for you. Might work for somebody else. So I would tell people out
That
there,
I can't emphasize that point enough.
right,
It's like, well, Aunt Rose said she's taking, Prozac,
right,
and it works for her, so I'm going to get on Prozac, and I'm going to ask my primary care physician to, prescribe it. No,
might not work for you. Yeah,
you really, choosing the right psych meds is an art form.
right,
And hopefully, you have a psychiatrist who is well informed in psychopharmacology and really worries about the different drugs and the known side effects and this and that and everything else. And it's not, you're not just your mental illness. I'm not my depression.
Right. Exactly.
You know, I'm this complex, existing human being who happens to live with depression. But oh yeah, I also happen to have ADHD.
Right.
And so, we have to kind of treat the holistically treat the whole person. And what may work to just kind of target in on the depression or the bipolar or the schizophrenia or what have you, um, may cause side effects that are just not tenable.
Right. Exactly.
So you need to be informed, you need to advocate for yourself, but you need to really have a good rapport and a trust with your prescribing doctor. And some people have a physician assistant. Some people have a primary care doctor that handle the psych meds. If you can, and if you can afford it, I would say try to find somebody, a psychiatrist who specializes in psychopharmacology.
For sure. Yeah, I have a mix. I use a psychiatrist for one of my drugs, and uh, one of the other ones I've been on for a long time now. It's just managed by my primary care, which kind of makes sense in that case. But the other one, which it's been kind of a learning process with over the last year and a half or so. I'm still seeing the psychiatrist over that, and I think we've finally dialed it in. And but I would agree with you. The psychiatrists definitely know what they're doing for the most part. And like you said before, sometimes those might not be a good fit either. Um, I had one that weaned me off a drug the wrong way, and I ended up in the ER twice within 48 hours with severe withdrawal symptoms. Even though he said it was probably some sort of food poisoning, which
Yeah.
I don't know how that happened, because it seems like it was the opportunity and the timing was off for that, and it was a pure misery for about 48 hours. But like you said, good fit with certain doctors is important. One thing I wanted to ask you, or a couple things. Can you just back up to that course you were talking about? I'm not really familiar with it. Was it
Sure.
is it something you just did by yourself, or you had to go to
No.
a thing
This
for
I
it?
took. It was therapist led,
Okay.
and it's called dialectical behavior therapy, or
Okay.
DBT.
DBT.
David Bravo Charlie, or Tango. Yeah, I forget my phonetic alphabet. Take me out of the uniform, and all that stuff goes by the wayside. Um, it, I had done cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy
Right.
for 24 years. And then, at the end of 14 years with my second therapist, who I love dearly, and she literally saved my life 3 separate occasions by getting me to the ER when I didn't know well enough that that's where I needed to be. Um, Anyways, she said, I got nothing more for you. And I really think you would benefit by taking this dialectical behavior therapy program. And she had a friend of hers who owned a practice in Bethesda, and was able to put me in touch. Well, she reached out and then found the right therapist for me, somebody who was close to me in age, who had a lot of years of experience, and ended up working with this woman named Mary. And the training, there's 4 different modules in this 400-page book
Oh
that
wow.
you use as a guideline to go through. But we had weekly skills group training,
Okay.
and it wasn't group therapy. We weren't helping one another like you would in traditional group therapy. I likened it more to a class.
Okay.
We were learning about the skills, and we were practicing them and doing what you would in a normal, educational setting or training setting. And then we would have individual therapy with that therapist once a week. And I would track my mood on this, diary card, and what was triggering it. And so we talked about all the things that were happening to you on a day-to-day basis during that previous week. And then what skills did you consider using to try to mitigate the issues that you were dealing with, or if your stress or just went haywire on you, and there's ways, there's a skill called tip
Okay.
for temperature, um, paced breathing, and vigorous exercise or invigorating exercise, CIP. And the idea that changing temperature is maybe you take a hot shower.
Hmm.
And what works for me is I have this malleable ice pack that's made
Okay.
of pig fat, so it doesn't freeze, and I can mold it to my face. So when I am stressed out beyond belief and no longer capable of having rational thought, I have enough thought to go to the freezer, grab this ice pack, put it on your face, bend down, and what it does is it simulates the diver's response. And
Ah,
physiologically, what is
interesting.
happening is it starts slowing your heart rate, and you start getting into paced breathing or controlled breathing,
Right.
and that lowers your heart rate still further, and it lowers your subjective unit of distress, if you will, below the threshold at which point rational thought takes over. And then it's like, now I can function and reason for myself. And now what other skills can I use?
Right.
One of the things that I like to do a lot is to catastrophize.
Okay.
And, oh my God, the chicken little, the world is, the
Right.
sky is falling, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the other things that I'm, find myself doing a lot is just making assertions that aren't based in fact. And so there's this skill called check the facts.
Okay.
I thought for the longest time that I had more suck in my life than joy.
Right.
And I would go around and I would tell you about it. Oh, I have more suck in my life than joy.
Right.
And I would kind of say it in that tone, kind of a defeatist attitude. And then I recently, in early November this year, or last year, I'm sorry, uh, said, check the facts on that. So I started tracking my mood from awful, bad, okay, good, and great. So five scale, word picture.
Right.
And then I journaled. Why was it a good day? Why was it a great day? Why was it an okay day? Why was it a bad day? What happened? And since I started doing that in early November of 2024, I have had 3 okay days. I have had 2 bad days, and the rest, no awful days. And I've had the rest good and great days.
Oh, wow. That's
And that
awesome.
includes 8 days of being bedridden twice with flu-like symptoms.
Right.
And you'd think, God, you're bedridden, you're feeling horrible. I mean, this can't possibly be a good day. But I was texting friends, I was talking to friends, calling and checking up with people. And emotionally, I was very filled and very satisfied. Physically, it felt like
Right.
crap. You know, but so it's skills like that and right now, I have graduated from the program, but I'm in what's called the DBT graduate group.
Okay.
So there's 3 or 4 other people who have gone through a program. One woman was in my class, so I've known her for over a year. And it is actually group therapy where you're helping one another and trying to figure out, well, did you consider this skill, or if you tried that, what happened? And so it keeps the skills forefront in my prefrontal cortex, so I'm more nimble with the skills, can readily turn to them. You go through therapy and you learn coping skills, or what by any other term, and a lot of the time it's like when you need them, they're nowhere to be found,
Exactly. I would agree
because
with
I
that.
haven't done enough practice with them to get the muscle memory to say, I'm losing my wits about me. I know I got to go to the freezer and grab that ice pack. and things like that just become automatic reflexes. And so again, the name of the program is dialectical, which is kind of an odd word, and I'll explain it in a moment. Behavioral therapy,
Okay.
or Delta Bravo Tango. For those in the military world, and remember your phonetic alphabet like I don't. The dialectical is simply a big word that means you can have two opposing emotions be true at the same time. And you can think about maybe birthday or something. You're really excited and happy and joyful about it being your birthday, and then your Aunt Harriet can't show up because she got sick or was in a car accident or whatever, and you feel sad about that.
Right.
At the same time, you're feeling happy. So it's two opposing thoughts, and for me, um, suicidal thoughts became an everyday occurrence, in a all-consuming occurrence for me for many, many years. Dialectically, I'm out living a grand life. I'm volunteering. I'm involved. I get direct my philanthropy to different causes that are important to me. I have a circle of friends that I get together with. I have a very rich life.
Right.
And even though my wife died 3 years ago,
Right.
I've been able to kind of get through that grief and get to the point where, hey, life is really worth living.
That's awesome. That's
And
great to hear.
dialectically, I'm going to kill myself.
Right. That's the
Every
opposite, right?
friggin' day. But I finally gotten to the point where I have eradicated that suicidal thought, and I am really making some major changes. You can't see from the image on the screen, but I'm a big guy, height-wise and weight-wise, and I ended up, purposely doing that because it was my passive suicidality trick that would shorten my lifespan, and I knew what I was doing. I'm smart enough to figure that out. No more. I'm still working on my mental health because that I have a chronic illness that needs to be managed on a daily basis. But I'm also starting to manage my physical health. I'm reaching out to a nutritionist. I'm changing the diet structure. I'm starting to exercise more. The only concern I have is it too little, too late? Has the damage already been done? And can it be reversed? But I'm going to try.
Right, you got to try, right?
And at the end of the day, that's really all you can do is try.
One thing, a couple of things you hit on there, I find interesting too. It's almost like at least in the military, I remember training. You used to train on things to the point where it was like muscle memory, right? Or that's where you wanted to be, where you could flip a switch. Something bad happens, you could flip a switch somewhere on something, and you knew what you had to do. Didn't really have to think about it. I don't. I think I don't remember what you said a little bit earlier, but it's kind of like the same concept where I would love for my tool bag, box of tools that I have for my mental health to be able to do that. I don't know if it ever could do that. I feel like the negative stuff or the negative response to things that I've successfully suppressed is a horrible word to use. So successfully worked through that can still come out at times, right? And those bad times, I feel like that thing can come back and jump right in there like it never left. And sometimes it's just it's just tough, like you said, with all the tricks and things we learn and therapies and things like that. From the mental health standpoint, sometimes it doesn't work, or it's harder to fix some of those problems. As they happen. So.
Yeah, I think, one of the things, that we're doing, but we haven't really spoken to it, is trying to destigmatize mental illness.
For sure.
Your series of podcasts and trying to educate people on mental illness, and then having different speakers talk about their lived experience. hopefully, the people listening to the podcast are, hearing, and I hope they're hearing bad stuff, bad juju.
Right.
But you can manage it,
Right.
and if you think about mental illness, I don't like to call it an illness because I don't want to think of myself as chronically sick. I think of it as a mental health challenge.
Right.
We all have good days and bad days, whether
Right.
you are clinically depressed or have anxiety or bipolar or schizophrenia or what have you. Um, but talking about your story, sharing it with other people, one, you would be amazed at how many people sit there and that resonates with, because it is
100%.
such an issue in our society, and with the percentage of people who are personally afflicted. But you all know somebody who is,
Right. Exactly.
a loved one, a coworker, all of the above. Um, and, if you can help and talk to somebody about your struggles and the things that you've done to help improve your life, you're giving that, opportunity of hope to other people. And you're destigmatizing, that it's not, I'm not embarrassed that I have depression any more than I would be embarrassed if I had diabetes.
Right. Exactly.
It it is. Some people only have a mental illness or depression or anxiety for short periods of time, relatively, in their total span of life. Others, like myself, have been afflicted for a long, long time.
Right. Exactly.
And, I don't know what the future holds, but the future is brighter for me because I'm applying more and more skills, and I'm listening to my doctors, and I'm working with them, trying different modalities. Somebody asked me if I would do psilocybin if it became FDA approved or get into a clinical study. My answer to that is, when it becomes FDA approved, I may consider it.
Right.
Because in a clinical trial, you get one dose.
Right.
And if it works beautifully, then what?
That's true.
You
Yeah.
can't get another dose.
Yeah. Exactly.
Not in the clinical trial.
Right.
So it's, caveat emptor, and, just need to kind of be careful of what we're getting ourselves into, and go in with our eyes wide open in the most educated way possible. But one thing I did want to add is there's been a lot of movement in the part of the field where you can genomically test your ability to process certain psychiatric medication.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting.
And so you spit in a tube, so not unlike
Like your DNA testing that they
Ancestry
do.
and
Yeah.
the other one, we forget the name of off the top of my head, but it starts running a whole bunch of scientific tests and figuring out, well, you can metabolize this medication better than that medication. It's still not to the point where any of the providers that I've spoken to about it, they say, I will use it in considering types of, or brands of medication
Right.
in a certain class, but I won't use it to determine the class of medication I should be prescribing, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah. Gotcha.
But that's a field that continues to improve, and the more we know and do more with the human genome and learning about how the human body breaks down medications and what receptors in the brain are being signaled for these different types of medications, I think there's real hope and promise in that space.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's definitely stuff coming out, and even like, I'm not a huge smart guy about AI, but I met a woman working for a company that their goal was to use AI to kind of predict people's mental health challenges. Basically the whole gambit up to a possible suicide attempt or something like that. And, that obviously involved putting people's records into the AI thing. And, and doing all this. And they were doing some test trials. I think last time I talked to her, they were testing with the VA and doing some things there. But she says it was kind of interesting. They had got to it was like a 50 or 60% solution to, success rate, which I thought was decent enough at least from starting out, So yeah, between, the DNA stuff, which I hadn't heard of, AI, who knows what else. I mean, there's definitely stuff on the horizon. I think that'll make it better. And maybe those things will help break the stigma too, as things become more normal and more mainstream when, and
Yeah, I mean, how great would that be? You spit in a test tube and it says, oh, well, you need to be on, Wellbutrin, and you need to
right.
be on this or that, or, or the, you know, again, caveat emptor. I was on 2 psych meds, and over a period of time, they started losing a little bit of their efficacy. So the psychiatrist at the time, prescribed a drug called Abilify.
Mhm.
And they didn't know all that well then, but they know this class of drugs can cause, tremors and movements in your hands and feet
Right.
and face. And that's a condition called tardive dyskinesia.
Right.
Well, the first thing it did after 10 years of taking this med at a 10 milligram dose, which is a fairly high dose of that medication, is I ended up with Parkinsonian symptoms.
Oh, wow.
And I really thought I had Parkinson's
Right.
symptoms or Parkinsonian disease. And I went to my neurologist and I said, help. I'm shuffling like an old man. All my gait is slowed. My motions are slow. And she goes, oh, that's not Parkinson's disease. What you have is Parkinsonian-like symptoms caused by this medication. So let's
wow.
take you off of it.
Interesting.
Weaned off the drug. Damage done. 2 months after I finished, I'm sitting at the dinner table with my 2 adult sons at the time, and one of them looks at me and goes, "Dad, the hell's wrong with your face?" My tongue was sticking out like a snake every 2 seconds, and my face was contorting, and all these other issues. And P.S., it turns out that I have tardive dyskinesia caused by that medication that I no longer take.
That's
but
great.
The
So
symptoms still stay.
And so you still have the symptoms
so
today?
it gets stupid silly at times because I find myself, I have to take a medication for the side effects from another medication
right.
that I'm no longer taking.
Right.
And it kind of drives me a little batty when I think about it, but it's just one more thing to deal with. And I'm on a medication dosage that, I still have facial twitches and tweaks, and my hands, kind of shake and carry on and play the piano and do whatever it's going to do. And now it's kind of like an old sweater,
Right.
I mean, I've had it for a while now, so I've kind of gotten used to it. And it's just, that's just the tardive dyskinesia speaking.
Change topic a little bit. I don't know if you'd be interested to talk, or if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about it. I know you said you were inpatient for a little bit there. I think one thing that I think scares folks when they're, is getting to that point, or going to that point, or, what's going to happen to me if I have to go inpatient. I know a lot of people go like directly to the, like kind of you said earlier, the catastrophe, thinking like, I need to get mental health help, but they're going to commit me or something like that. I don't know if you'd be willing to talk about it a little bit, just kind of like the experience of being an inpatient. I've never been. I've had friends and coworkers that I've kind of walked through it, and they talk to me about it, but I just wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to share
about going
that. So,
inpatient.
right, like what's your day to day like if you're in there for a few days or a week or a month, So.
Well, what people need to really understand is that what inpatient programs do is to stabilize your mood. They're not healing you.
Right.
That and you're typically in there on average 4 to 5 days. Some people stay longer as needed or whatever. The idea, most of the time, what precipitates a trip to the ER and then admission to a behavioral health unit is suicidal thoughts
Okay.
that become, you're starting to have plans and you're starting to really think it through, and you're really kind of consumed by it. That you got to get in front of that thinking.
Right.
And the first time I went, I spent probably a good 4 hours pacing up and down the my room and the shower and everything else. And damn it, did they think of everything that could be used to harm yourself?
Right.
And they remove it. And so it is as physically as safe an environment as you can possibly find, because people who are still suicidal, well, okay, maybe it's not jumping off a building, but maybe it's you know poking my eye out with the bristles of my toothbrush,
Right.
or
Right. Yeah.
and hopefully I'm not to keep having people go, oh, that's a thought, I hadn't thought of that one. Yeah, I had a lot of thoughts, so I got a lot of plans and a lot of ideas. But um, I've been in most of the behavioral health units in the DMV,
Okay.
over time, and some are better than others. And what makes them better is not the facility, although it's nice. I mean, times I've had a private room, other times you're sharing a room with somebody. It all depends on what your stances are. Um, but you have um, group programs, and you have art therapy. You have people who are doing cognitive behavioral therapy with you individually and in groups. You're helping one another. There's socialization around meal times, and they encourage you to socialize with the other inpatients. And because you know, I feel like the wily old veteran. When I go into these places, I'm twice as old as the next youngest person, or next oldest person, I should say, and I could teach the course
Right.
and run the programs because I've seen them done so frequently, and then I have a lot of knowledge that I could bring to bear. And and a lot of times I think that I'm speaking up too much, and that I should step back and let others talk, and let the therapists talk,
Right.
because they're the ones who get paid to do this, and have the requisite training and knowledge to do that. Um, but I've had more and more therapists tell me, and they said, speak, take the whole time to speak, because people are listening to you and your lived experience with total rapture. And because you've been there,
Right.
you
Exactly. It's that
walk the
connection.
walk,
Yep.
you know what it's like, and you're imparting wisdom on people that can really, really help them. And the therapist can say the exact same thing as I'm saying, but other patients are hearing is Charlie Brown's parents, wah 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 wah. But when I talk, it's sort of like the old E.F. Hutton commercials, and if you remember way back when, you probably do. Um, and the whole premise was, when they speak, people listen.
Yep.
Well, that's kind of what it's like when I speak. Not that I'm the sagest or the brightest bulb in the pack or anything of the sort, but when you have a lived experience, people want to know about it. Hey, you did ketamine. What was that experience like? Can you explain it to me? Can you
Right.
explain the process of finding somebody who does ketamine treatments? You've done transcranial magnetic stimulation. You've done electroconvulsive therapy. What were those things like? What was the difference? What benefited? What didn't benefit? And to be able to provide that advice, I feel I feel kind of honor bound to do that. And I volunteer a lot for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, and I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, so I've helped the local affiliate.
Right.
And one of the programs that I love that they do with civic groups in the community is called In Our Own Voice, and it's where two people with a lived experience of mental illness go out to a group for an hour and talk about their personal experiences. And it's scripted, so it's
Right.
kind of like, what happened, what's working and what's next. You kind of chunk it into three different segments like that. But the feedback, we do it to a group of nursing students at Montgomery College over in Tacoma Park, and it's typically after their psychology um, module that they do in their program, and then we come in and talk. Most of the times, I draw the after lunch crowd,
Right.
and these are college students who are busy and tired and sleep deprived and everything else. Not a single head on the desk, not a single person on their cell phone, not a single person having a side conversation with the person next to them in the seats. They are riveted on what the two individuals are talking about. And then feedback. Oh, I didn't know. I think I have depression.
Right.
Or, oh my gosh, you just described my brother.
Right.
And get these the rawest and the most honest feedback from people who you can see the tangible benefit that you're bringing to them. And again, it destigmatizes, which I can't say enough. In until we get more people talking about it, until we get insurance companies paying for it, there's still a lot of work to be done.
I agree. I think one of the most important things, and I've tried to preach to as much as I possibly can, is just the talking piece. The sharing of your experiences, and like you said, you're a living example of all these things you went through. And when you can sit there and talk about it in front of somebody, and they can listen and say, like you said, oh, maybe my brother has that, maybe I have that, or maybe I've wanted to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist and I haven't, but here's this person sitting in front of me that's done it for so many years, or maybe I'm ready to take that next step. I find it very important, but it's also very therapeutic. I feel like for me to talk about it sometimes. There are plenty of times where I don't want to talk about it. And I'm sure you might feel the
Right.
same way. There's days where I'm like, not today, Josh. And I remember one of my psychologists telling me that, hey, that's great that you want to do all this stuff. And it's an awesome thing, but make sure you take the time for yourself, because there's going to be days where you don't want to talk about it, or you need that break. But something I've talked to you about a little bit about the foundation we're trying to set up. Like, that is a big goal of mine, is just to, that peer-to-peer kind of group discussion. I don't want to use therapy because, I feel like therapy has a professional component to it, but that kind of peer-to-peer discussion over coffee, over whatever, and you kind of share your experiences and bounce ideas off each other and things like that. And like you said, go to places like schools and other events. I've done some of my own public speaking at certain events where with similar responses. And, I had one woman come up to me at the end of the last one I did. Hey, my son, she was a veteran. He's a veteran of the Iraq War. I know he needs help. He's struggling right now. So-and-so won't help him. We're really trying to get him help. Would you be willing to at least talk to him as a peer? And I said, 100%. I think, I just really think that peer-to-peer piece is important to break the stigma. So,
yeah. The I'm going to make a passion plug for NAMI, the NAMI organization, and again, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. There's a national office in Arlington, Virginia.
Mhm.
Each state has a NAMI state office that runs training programs for its volunteers, and then where the programs are applied are at the affiliate level. So,
Right.
but many counties, have Howard County has a NAMI affiliate. We have one. Not every county does. Some kind of combine, and we do some work with the Prince George's County in Maryland as well. And the programs are free.
Right.
And they have peer support programs. So it is co-facilitated by two people with mental illness who are specifically trained to co-facilitate a group and make sure everybody has, equal participation, and,
Right.
call on members who are a little shy or something if you think that they have something that they want to say or question to ask. That program, what got me volunteering for NAMI is that program helped me when I first came to this area back in 1983. And I was, still in the military. And then as I started to transition and get into therapy, I started looking for, other groups or nonprofits that offered some type of mental health support.
Right.
And I found that through NAMI, and really, really helped me at a time when I was struggling really the most in my lifetime. And that they also offer family to family programs, and it's so that's for loved ones of people living with a mental health issue. And the thing I would say is, I myself, I'm fortunate I don't have a mental illness, but my mother does.
Right.
My father does, my brother, my sister, my aunt, my best friend, my neighbor. And what I would encourage you to do is, if you have somebody that you know that is struggling and won't seek the help that they, he or she needs, is to talk to them. Explain to them the different options. Be that moral compass for them. Not moral compass per se, but be that advocate for them until they can self-advocate.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that can be the greatest gift of love or support that you can give to somebody.
Oh, I agree. It's funny. Since we talked the first time, I definitely need to get on that NAMI thing. I'm sure there's one here in DC that I could probably assist with, or like I said, be one of those speakers too. I think that'd be definitely interesting. I know you hit it on it earlier before we started. I know you've been writing a book, kind of like a memoirs. Anything you want to say about that, or anything you want to talk about that?
Well, it's what I haven't talked about, and I'll share here because I'm a firm proponent in sharing, is that I am have a fluid sexuality and a fluid gender identity.
Okay.
And so the title of my book, you have to understand that my mental illness predates my military time and postdates my military time. The military was this, period of considerable years. But I write a lot about my military time, but I also am continuing this story in talking about my ketamine trips and what those were like and what I learned from them and things of that sort. But the working title of my book is Queer and Depressed in the Military, a memoir of hope and resilience. Because no matter how dark you think it can get, and believe me, I've seen dark times, and I'm sure you all the listeners have seen dark times, and I know, Josh, you've seen dark times. Don't ever give up hope. Hope that tomorrow is going to be a better day. Hope that tomorrow, you feel a little bit stronger or a little bit more empowered to be able to reach out for the help that you so desperately need. And hope, without hope, I contend there is no life.
Right.
And I didn't have hope for many, many years. And I was just looking for ways to end it. And, I only had the one attempt, but that was enough to sober me up to say, there's days still that when I look back on that time in February of, coming up on an anniversary, my 17th anniversary on February 8th. I look back at that time and I'm so grateful for Honda restraint systems that I underestimated. And other times I go, God, why didn't that work?
Right, right.
So depends on what side of the coin you're on. But one of the things I want to say, and it kind of seems trite. I go around telling people, and I go around telling myself, attitude is everything. And you've heard it in sports, you've heard it in, business parlance, in the military, attitude is everything, in basic training or what have you. But what I find is, tracking the quality of my day, awful, bad, okay, good, and great. It's a mental choice that I make to say, no, I had a good day. I
Right.
had 1 hour of that day that I had a shitty meeting, pardon my French. I didn't know the rules about
You're
speaking
good.
French or not on the podcast. Um, you have one thing that is upsetting, or you get bad news about a friend who's sick or, whatever the case may be. But the rest of the day is great.
But it's easy to put that day in the bad negative light, right? From that one incident.
And I used to color my entire day based on the one little thing that didn't go well.
Right.
Now I can parse it out and I can say, I had a really good day, except for that, sad phone call that I got from my friend who's sick, or whatever the case may be. And it really, it matters.
It does.
And it's contagious.
It is
When you
contagious. You're right.
start having a positive attitude and outlook on things, you're looking for positive things to take away from life instead of looking for the suck in life.
That's true.
And boy, did that. I recently came to this conclusion. I tell people that 67th year is a charm. And then we keep learning, and the day we stop learning is the day that we die.
Right.
So we're always learning new things, and we need to be open to those new ideas and those new concepts and challenging old concepts that aren't serving us well.
No, I agree. It's funny. I didn't realize it. Even my wife kind of picked up on it. I have a very dark sense of humor, kind of observational comedy type thing, which I think couple those two things together can be a very negative thing. And then I would intertwine other like real negative things that are going on, and sometimes that would turn into a whole, like you kind of said earlier, like, oh my God, my day's ruined off this one little small event. For a good example for me, and this kind of goes back to my anxiety, my ADHD a bit. The other day, I was crossing the street out front of the apartment building we have here in DC, and there's a bike path, right? And I couldn't see the bike coming because there was a police car there with the lights on, and the lights were bright enough that you could not see anything coming down the lane. So this guy screamed at me, because he didn't want to hit me, and he was coming past the police car, which I just couldn't see him. And I took that as a negative thing at first, thinking like, oh man, this guy just yelled at me. Who was he? What the heck? Even though he was just trying not to hit me, right? I didn't do anything necessarily wrong. I was gonna walk in his path, but for the first like half an hour after that hour, it was really like, from the ADHD mind, it was really spinning in my head, like replaying this really small event, right? Nothing happened. The guy just was going to hit me by accident. He would have hit me, no harm, no foul. But for me, it turned into this kind of like, never ending negative event all of a sudden. First thing in the morning, 7 a.m., right? And I'm like,
well, and that can absolutely color your day.
It can, but I was able to break out of that and realized, okay, hold on.
There you go.
This isn't a negative. This is a one little time thing. Nothing bad happened because of it. It really wasn't a negative thing. He was just trying not to hit me on the bike, right? And let's move on with your day. And the rest of the day turned out to be a normal, okay day for me. So it was good. But it's interesting. That line of thinking.
And an event like that, you could have chosen to let it color your day
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
and week
Yep.
and month.
Yep. Yeah, it just builds on each other.
And ruminate about that experience.
Exactly.
And going, God, that guy yelling, what the hell, yeah. You know, and concocting this whole little, vignette and story in your head about what was really going on. And here the guy was just concerned for his safety,
Yeah.
and he yelled at you, and probably appropriately, because you didn't see him, so you can't say it was your fault. But the outcome could have been a lot worse, and
Well,
the guy could have been,
he was going fast enough.
on the
Yeah.
bike.
He was going fast enough. It would have probably done some damage. But, and it's funny. That's where, I hate when people say, well, can't you just get over it? Right. It's like, even little things like that for some of us that, deal with mental health things, getting over it is not a concept that works. Right. It's not just an easy, hey, you should just be able to get over that, man. No big deal. Well, that's not really how it works, So.
I admit to being an impatient driver and quick to road rage.
Right.
In my younger years, I'm slowing down physically, but now when somebody doesn't use their turn signal, instead of saying "you moron" and beeping the horn, or making a personal one-fingered salute wave, I just say, "Oh, the car was so expensive you couldn't afford the turn signal option. I forgive you."
Yeah.
Or the person who cuts you off in line to get one car with closer to their destination. I always envision that they have a 9.5-month pregnant wife in the car,
Right.
and they're trying to get to medical attention so they don't have to deliver the baby in the car. And I just concoct these stories. I mean, some of them are like, wow, that's pretty bizarre. But it really helps me calm down and realize, hey, and I guess the other thing to say is, a lot of people are stressed and have a lot of anxiety over what's happening in the political segment or whatever. Well, some of us are going to be happy some years when our guy is in office, and other times we're not going to be, happy. But the bottom line is, we're all in this together.
Right.
The other day, coming home through rush hour on Rockville Pike, and I just paused at a traffic light, and I went, everybody in the cars around me are trying to get home. They're wanting to get home to be with their loved ones. They're wanting to have dinner, at a decent hour, and it's just, it just changed the whole focus I had.
It does.
Rather than idiots on the road and cutting you off and this and that. We're all the same stripe. We're all human.
Yeah, we all have our stressors.
Do the best we can for ourselves and our loved ones.
Right.
And provide for them. And so, I really, I don't see enemies with political stripes, as a lot of people do, and that to me, that's a red flag. If you start thinking of other people as enemies,
right.
We're not at war with them.
No.
That's the only appropriate time to use the word enemy.
Right.
If you're in a full-fledged fight with them. We have different ideas or different ways to go about achieving the same things for posterity and helping our families survive, get our kids a good education, and launch them and have them get out in society and make their mark. So, anyways, I'm waxing poetic and philosophical, but I couldn't do that years ago.
Right. And here you are now, right?
Yeah. My political PTSD, and it's been going ever since I've been aware of politics, and living in Washington, D.C. area, where the national news is the local news.
Right.
You kind of get a steady diet of it, and it kind of causes dis-ease or disease. So,
I've always found it interesting. Like, I love going. One of my things is going to get coffee. That's just my thing. I enjoy sitting at coffee shops. 99% of the time, I'm going to have a fun. I'm going to relax. I people watch. That's kind of my thing. And I always like to think, what is that person over there hand jamming away at their laptop? Stressing out. How's their day going? I've always just been somebody that has that kind of like you said, we're all in this together kind of mentality. I get on the elevator 2 or 3 times a day, at least here in the apartment building. I don't know how many people live in this building, thousands. I don't know, hundreds at least. And you get in the elevator with 6 different people. Well, there's 6 different things going on in that elevator, right? And I've always made it a point, and people have laughed at me for this. I always try to say hello or ask people how they're doing, and which is why I've made it one of the slogans for the foundation, the Razor Banner Foundation. But I feel like it's important because you just never know. Like I get in the elevator with a person and I say hello or good morning or ask them a question. Whether you get sometimes you don't get a response. Sometimes you do.
Well,
But,
sometimes people are just in their head and they don't hear you or they choose not to, respond.
But I just for me, it's the thought of okay, maybe me saying hello or how's it going just broke them out of that negative thought cycle, which I know has happened to me before. Somebody might have said something or done something or asked me a question at a coffee shop and it snapped me out of that maybe a negative. I know it's happened, right? It snapped me out of a negative cycle that I had been in at the time. So
Isn't
I
it
don't know,
nice?
It is
to
nice.
Start your day off and being civil with a
Yeah, right.
with a
Being
stranger.
civil. That's a good way to put it. Well, it goes back to this, and I feel like this is a really fundamental part to all of this. Just care for each other. Like it isn't a hard concept. It's hard to implement. It seems like, but for a lot of people, but I can be as completely opposite to you on every aspect in the world, politics, this, that, whatever. But I can still care. Like I can have some caring for you. I'm not a real religious person, but religion teaches about caring too. So I don't know how that all intertwines and people end up not caring. But I feel like from the mental health standpoint, we just care for each other. I think that would go a long way.
I find going out of my way to treat other people nicely is, and you may not get validation from them that,
Right.
oh, thank you. Oh, happy day to you too. Or, anything of the sort. But just by me making that choice to reach out to others and connect and have that community with somebody, a stranger in the elevator or what have you, I just find so empowering and it sets me in the right mental state for my day.
Right.
And I talk about, for a long, long time, I've known I've had depression since age 12, even though I wasn't diagnosed. I mean, I knew what it was and how I felt and being suicidal and watching my dad get remarried and standing in my new stepmother's living room and watching that whole thing. I just wanted to walk out the front door and keep going and kill myself. Those were pretty traumatic times. So what I've learned over time is to be kind to myself. And I'm starting to really delve into the whole world of self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And, I used to live for external validation.
Right.
Oh, somebody pinned a medal on my chest, or somebody gave me a good officer proficiency report.
Well, it's like that's that immediate endorphin hit, right?
But what can you do for yourself?
Right.
How can you motivate yourself? How can you take care of yourself and give yourself some grace?
For
we
sure.
do it for our friends.
We do it for everybody else, right?
Why not do it for ourselves?
Yep.
And get that self-intrinsic motivation and feedback loop going. And then, if the external validation isn't coming on a given day, that's okay. I can generate my own. I lived a good day today and I did a good thing and I feel really good about myself. But I find that with my mental health challenge, euphemistic way of saying it's a chronic illness.
Right.
And it has to be managed on a daily basis. So I allow myself more time in the morning. I listened to a 5-minute guided meditation on gratitude that I find so powerful. I mean, there's so many thousands of them out there. There's different apps. You get all this stuff for free. And I finally started doing that. And what a difference. It just sets my frame of mind and puts me in the right perspective to start my day.
It sets the tone, right?
And I compare that to days where, like this morning, the alarm went off. I had to jump in the shower, and I allow myself 15 minutes for the shower, and then I dry myself off, and I throw my clothes on, and I scurry out the door, and I go to my first appointment, and and I haven't taken the time to mentally be present.
Right.
And those days don't go quite as well as those.
the other
Those
days.
are the good days versus the great days.
That makes sense. So look, we've talked about a lot. I know we could probably go for another 3 or 4 hours.
Oh, yes, we could.
But I think as we're coming to the end of at least this episode, is there anything else you'd like to just leave the audience? We'll leave with the audience here before we sign off.
Yeah, no, this is I really enjoyed being here and talking with you, and that's really what it felt like, was just having a conversation. So I was it's the first podcast I've ever done, so it's like, oh, how do you do that? You get a little bit of a social anxiety or
sure.
anxiety over the effort, but
Well,
I hope the people listening to this, really we threw a lot out there, and if you caught half of what we threw out there, you're doing pretty well.
Well, look, I can't thank you enough. I know for the audience listeners out there that really probably pieced some of this together. Bob said he came to the Air Force in '75, I believe. With your gender fluidity and then your other mental health challenges. That was during a time where that stuff was not conducive, and that really didn't change probably till, I don't remember when the even Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, which that was, you were before that too. Such a challenging time. Unimaginable to me. I can't thank you enough for sharing your story, just the strength of all that, your resiliency. Two words that you definitely define. And again, thank you so much for coming on. And I look forward to, I know we're due for a coffee here, so I look forward to our continued work together in friendship. And like I said, I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And it was a lot of fun, and more to come, I'm sure.
Definitely more to come.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Remember, raise your banner if you're somebody can turn to in a time of need, or raise your banner if you just need help. And please remember, you're not alone. There are resources out there, whether national hotlines, local hotlines, friends, family, or professionals. They are out there. The Raise Your Banner podcast is produced by the Raise Your Banner Foundation in conjunction with research conducted by Matrixa Research Group, and your host is Josh Robichaud. Artwork is from the talented Jenna Bordinger, and music is by the talented Josiah DJ Slowbo Renton.